during the 20 years that I've been on the bench, and I've gone over the ins and outs of drug court with you. And I don't know, a year and a half ago, Robin Carroll and David Butler and I came and gave you pretty much the in and outs of what we now call the Smarter Sentencing Program. So I thought what I would do today is sort of give you a historical perspective of what's happened in the last 40 years, and finish up with some ideas about things that are about to come to fruition in the criminal justice system. I gave you these figures when I was here with Robin and David, but I think they bear repeating. In October of 1965, there were 1,992 people in the Arkansas Department of Corrections. By 1984, that number had risen to 4,341. By 1996, 9,726. By April of 2010, 15,382. And now there are more than 20,000 people in the Arkansas Department of Corrections. There are a lot of theories, a lot of ideas about why this has happened. We frequently hear, and I'm sure some of you share the view, that the breakdown of the traditional family is a large reason for why it's happened. Taking God and religion out of the schools is a theory that many believe in. TVs and movies, the whole realm of entertainment, poor educational systems, and drugs. For me, and from my experience over the last 40 years, and I've been right smack dab in the middle of it, because I was not a Vietnam veteran, but I was in school during all that period of time, and saw what began to happen with drugs, and the whole drug culture began to take form and began to become a problem for everybody at every socioeconomic, racial level. It didn't matter. People were just getting on drugs. For me, the drugs are at the base of this explosion in the population of our criminal justice system. And it's not just Arkansas. This is true nationwide. Drugs not only affect the individual that's addicted. It affects everything. It affects the educational system. It affects family. Anything that addict is associated with, related to, is affected by drugs. The boom in growth of the Arkansas Department of Corrections and the boom in the use and abuse of drugs and alcohol exactly parallel each other. One doesn't explain the other, but they go hand in hand, and I cannot separate, in my mind, the idea that this explosion in the population of the crime scene would not have happened but for drugs. Not only do I handle all the criminal cases in Columbia County and Cleveland County, I also handle about 80% of the juvenile cases throughout the 13th Judicial District. As a juvenile judge, I see firsthand what's happening to kids 10, 11, 12, 13 years old who are becoming addicted to drugs. But one thing that juvenile court does that no other court in the world does is it gives us jurisdiction over the entire family. So if a child violates the law, breaks the law as a delinquent, I get jurisdiction over his parents. Schools file what are called FINS petitions. FINS stands for Family in Need of Services. I get jurisdiction over the entire family. I also handle all the DHS cases in the 13th Judicial District, with the exception of El Dorado. Those cases involve people who have had their children taken away from them. 75% of all those cases deal with parents who are either addicting drugs and causing them to abuse or neglect their children, or their child is born with try murder case any day than to have to deal with families who are completely ripped apart because mom or dad or both are addicted and they're taking it out on their kids to the point that their kids are in an unsafe and an unhealthy environment. So, through all that experience, for me, as I said, the drugs are at the base of what led to a large part of the increase in the prison population of the Arkansas Department of Corrections. When I started practicing law here in 1969, Harry Crumpler was a circuit judge, and I do not remember having a drug case while Judge Crumpler was on the bench. I can't remember the year, I think it was 72, that he became incapacitated physically and had to resign, and Mike, you may know, it was early on in that period of time. And Jack Graves was elected. And Jack Graves served until 96 or 8, I can't remember. At any rate, Jack was the criminal judge for the 13th Judicial District. We had one judge handling all the criminal cases. How nice that must have been. He traveled 6 counties and take care of all the criminal cases. Most days he was through by 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Nowadays, 4 judges can't keep up with all the criminal cases that are on the dockets of the 6 counties that we deal with. Jack Graves was an old school judge, and I loved him. He was definitely a mentor of mine. But if you were convicted or if you pled guilty to a crime, the first thought was that you're going to prison, and it was the defense attorney's job to try to convince the prosecutor to agree with the defense counsel that this person should have one more chance. That was an arduous effort sometimes, because Jack Graves thought if you violated the law, you should go to prison. And there are a lot of people who still believe that today. When I took over for Jack after he had to retire, drug courts had already begun to become a reality in the nation. The first drug court, I believe, was in 1988. It was funded by the federal government, and it was in Miami, Florida. The success of that program led the federal government to fund some pilot programs around the nation, and one of them was in Little Rock. And that drug court was extremely successful. The state then decided to fund one in Fayetteville, Washington County. By this time, early mid-90s, the concept was taking over. The pilot programs had been able to generate enough interest and enough success to show the rest of us that there was something to this. And so Arkansas decided in 2000, that they would fund 10 pilot programs around the state. Now, because we here in Columbia County had been through a national training program to operate a drug court, we were selected as one of the 10. I became very interested in drug courts in 99, 2000, in that vicinity, because the evidence, the empirical evidence was just there. And our prisons were so overcrowded that something had to be done. And so I put together a team, and we applied for permission with the federal government to attend training seminars all over the country. I went to San Bernardino, to Los Angeles, to Salt Lake City, one other one I can't remember. But we learned how to operate a drug court through those systems, and we applied for a federal grant, didn't get it. But in the meantime, meantime, the state had decided to fund these 10 courts, and so we were actually the third drug court in the state of Arkansas. And we've been in operation ever since. What came out of the overcrowding of all these prisons around the current country was prisons cannot treat drug addiction. They cannot do it. Inmates are in prison to get out of prison. They don't care about anything else. They will take whatever program is out there. They'll go through GED. They'll do anything they can to get out of prison. But what happens when they get out? They go right back to where they came from. They have no skills. They have no job. They have no employment status whatsoever. They're in the same neighborhood, living with the same people, and so they go right back. Recidivism in the Arkansas Department of Corrections is above 50%. So every other person who comes out of the Arkansas Department of Corrections winds up back in the Arkansas Department of Corrections. Our drug court program here, I believe, has been enormously successful. It was not welcomed with open arms. Law enforcement was not in favor of it in the beginning. Many city and county officials were not in favor of it. It was still the old idea, you can lock them up and throw away the key and they won't be drug addicts. Well, that just simply isn't true. So now every judicial district in Arkansas has at least one drug court. We have 3 in our judicial district, El Dorado, Camden, and here. We are by far the most successful in my view. El Dorado would argue with me about that, but nonetheless, we've all done our share. And everybody suddenly got on the bandwagon with this. Legislators loved it because we weren't sending so many people to prison. Prisons loved it because they weren't having to deal with so many people, and their budgets, they thought, would be better, and the legislature thought they wouldn't have to spend so much money on prisons. That didn't work because the drug population and the crimes caused by drugs continued to explode. And so they found themselves again overcrowded. It got so bad in Arkansas that some of you will recall that the federal government actually sued the Arkansas Department of Corrections and had the entire system declared unconstitutional. It got so bad that some of you will remember Tommy Robinson, the sheriff of Pulaski County, taking about 20 or 30 guys out of his jail who had been sentenced to ADC, but whom ADC wouldn't accept because they didn't have room, and he took them down to one of the prisons and chained them to the outside fence and left them there. And of course he was held in contempt of court for that, but that was the problem. We were doing all we could, but we still weren't resolving the issue of prison overcrowding and the huge expenditures that it costs to house these inmates. $16,000 a year now for males, $14,000 a year for females, and it just keeps growing. Well, the legislature's not going to raise taxes to build more prisons, and certainly the Arkansas electorate is not going to vote for more funds to increase the number of prison beds. So we were sort of at a stalemate. In late 2010, we came to the realization that we didn't need to send people to prison if we could help it. And so really the brainchild of this was David Butler. He's not here, so I'm going to brag on him. If he was here, I'd take all the credit, but I'll lay the credit where it is. He decided that what we should do, instead of sending certain classes of people to prison, was kind of develop our own prison system. And here's the way the system works in Arkansas. For the vast majority of convicted criminals, they have to serve by law 1/3 of their sentence. but they get day for day good time while they're there, so practically they serve 1/6 of their sentence. So if I sentence somebody to 10 years, they have to do 20 months. Well, there's two little bugaboos in that concept. One is ADC's developed this thing called boot camp. Boot camp is a 110-day program. Anybody who receives a Class C or Class D felony conviction and does not receive more than a 10-year sentence is eligible to apply for boot camp. Well, you got to be able to, boot camp's exactly what it sounds like. It's a military type operation for 110 days, but instead of serving 20 months on a 10-year sentence, they go through 110 days and then they're back. That came home to us just recently when we sentenced a lady to a 10-year program, 10-year sentence, and she was back in practically no time. Turned out it was 110 days. She went to prison with some rather serious physical and mental, health issues. So we knew she wasn't going to qualify for boot camp. Well, she was back, and I was not happy, Butler was not happy, so Butler called the ADC and was advised that no longer do you have to participate in the program. If you're not physically able, all you have to do is try. So she qualified for boot camp, and she was back in 110 days. They also have this other little act called the Emergency Powers Act. Because of the federal lawsuit, we had to agree that here's the maximum number of inmates at any one time, and when you reach that magic number, Emergency Powers Act kicks in, and ADC is authorized to cut them loose. I'm sorry, I keep hitting that. And from time to time, usually about every 3 months at the most, they invoke the Emergency Powers Act, and hundreds of inmates are cut loose. Not because they deserve it, not because they've earned it, but because they are the ones who they can best release without too much fear of their going home and killing somebody or whatever. So those two things have made us take a look at the Smarter Sentencing Program. But as I said, David and I decided we would stop sending these people to prison. And what we started doing was sentencing them to a combination of community service, 200 to 400, 500 hours, depending on what they've done, and usually with 30, 60, 90 days in the county jail. We felt like we got more bang for our buck doing that, and the citizens in this county got more bang for their buck than we did sending them up there and having them do absolutely nothing but go through boot camp and come right back here. And we started doing that in late 2010, early 2011. About that time, the Smarter Sentencing Program started growing nationwide. Judge Ham Singleton and Robin Carroll and Karen Harper, managing public defender, went to Atlanta, Georgia, to a conference, and they came back with this idea of community, the Smarter Sentencing concept. We partnered with Union County and got a $750,000 grant that allowed us to get our program up and going like it should have. It's a beautiful program. In my view, we still get a lot more bang for our buck than we do by sending people to prison, but we also get the ability to see to it that these individuals come out of our program with an education. They do not get out of our program without either a GED or a high school diploma. They do not get out of our program without a wage certificate. The major corporations in this county will not hire anybody, as I understand it, unless they have their wage certificate. And so a vast number of our graduates are now fully employed, they're taxpayers, and they're supported and everybody wins. We could have sent them to prison, and half of them would make it out here, meaning they don't go back to prison, and the other half would go back to prison. Recidivism rate in our smarter sentencing program is below 5%. We hardly ever see anybody come back as a charged felon in that program. That program is sweeping the nation. So, just a minute about what the future looks like. Mental health courts are becoming a big deal in America. We've learned through all these years, through the prison system and through the drug court programs, mental illness is somewhat akin to addiction. It's not something you can punish out of anybody. And so, rather than throw a mentally ill individual into prison for whatever period of time, it's better to try to treat the mental illness, resolve it, so that that individual won't commit crime, and at the same time, we're keeping them out of prison. We're saving that $16,000 to $14,000 a year that it costs to treat them, and they go to prison and they don't get a blessed thing. Prisons aren't equipped to deal with drug problems, and they sure aren't equipped to deal with mental health problems. Veterans courts are also expanding rapidly across the country. You watch the national news, it's not uncommon to see a show depicting the plight of people coming back from these various wars that we seem to find ourselves in all the time. Suicide is rampant for veterans coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And so these veterans courts are designed to deal with those kinds of issues. But a lot of those guys and gals are also criminals because of their problems, because of their addiction, because of whatever happened to them over there that's put them in the position that they can't comport with laws. Finally, family courts are becoming a growing proposition, and they, just like I have jurisdiction in juvenile court over the entire family, these family courts will take the place of basically what I do, and all of the issues of anger and violence that goes hand in hand with drugs and alcohol addiction will be dealt with in that family court. And so that's where we came from, where we are, and where we're headed. I'd be happy to answer your questions. I know it's after 1, and so some of you may want to hit the road. It won't hurt my feelings if you do, but yes, Mayor.
Chandler, we've got room for some of that community service in the city. If you'll send some more our way, I've got a man or a woman to lead, whichever you send.
And I want to compliment Mayor Van for what he's done. He's been very supportive and very cooperative with us in our program, and we've utilized his offer to help us, and we'll take advantage of that one too. Thank you very much for it. Joe?
Judge, it appears that the legalizing the marijuana or medical marijuana will be on the ballot for next time. If it passes, it's going to contribute to the problem you now have with drugs, regardless if it is medical, it's going to be abuse. Is it going to make it worse than what it is today?
You know, there are a number of states now that have legalized marijuana. I might point this out. We tried week before, I guess last week, Monday and Tuesday, the young man who robbed Walgreens here in Magnolia. I'm sure you read about it, and Mike covered it a lot. And he was a licensed marijuana grower in Colorado. He never had any other kind of job, except he worked for his daddy every once in a while. That was the only job this 30-year-old kid had ever had, but he got licensed by the state of Colorado to grow marijuana, and he is addicted to every drug there is. So that case, quite frankly, made me stop and think, what's the criteria for granting these licenses to these people to grow this stuff? It seems like it's happening all over the country all the time, that marijuana is either being legalized or it's being treated as something other than a crime. Eureka Springs, for example, has ordered its law enforcement officers not to arrest somebody if they have less than an ounce, I think, some small amount of marijuana, not to arrest them. They get a citation. So it doesn't go on their record as a crime. The Arkansas legislature did the same thing until this past legislative session. The second time you were caught in possession of marijuana, it was a felony. Well, that isn't true anymore. You can possess all kinds of marijuana time after time after time, but as long as it's a small enough amount, then you never get to the felony level. And a number of our drugs were classified at a lower level, from a B felony, which is up to 20 years in prison, to a C felony, which is 10-year maximum. Some of them down from C's down to D's, and so there is an emphasis on leniency. The legislature's motive, I'm quite certain, had nothing to do with being in favor of legalization. They were trying to keep people out of prison. We're still faced with that same problem of overcrowding in our prison systems, and so by making these less important crimes, that saves the room. I was shocked, quite frankly, at the vote discrepancy on the act last year when we voted on it. Only 30,000 votes difference between passage and failure. So, and they were on TV last night. They got their ballot title approved, and it'll be on there again. And they feel quite confident that they will get it passed. I don't know whether it'll make a difference. I do not. If it's properly regulated and good people are doing it, then I think there is a little concern. But if they operate it like Colorado did, I'm scared to death. Somebody back there had a...
Is that the motivation, is the motivation behind that, is that because of the overcrowding and to keep them spending as much time and as many tax
Sure.
dollars on, I mean, is that the main?
Yeah, the question is that the motivation to keep people from spending as much time in the Department of Corrections? And sure it is. If you got a 20-year sentence, you got to serve a sixth of it. Now, you don't get boot camp for any sentence over 10 years. I sentenced a lot of people to 11 years just to avoid that problem. But so anywhere